The emergency alert broke through regular programming with a crackle that felt like a warning shot across every screen in America. Bright red text flooded timelines, notifications chimed from phones, and news anchors struggled to keep their voices steady as they repeated the same chilling update. 3 minutes ago, Zak Bagans was rushed to the hospital after a critical incident inside the haunted museum. No one knew exactly what had happened, only that whatever it was, it had shaken even the most seasoned investigators into silence. Outside the museum, the street was flooded with police lights that painted the pavement in streaks of red and blue. Officers pushed back growing crowds, while journalists fought for vantage points, hoping to catch even the smallest glimpse of those being ushered in and out of the building. Something had happened in there, something big, and the tension in the air was thick enough to feel against the skin. A paramedic, pale as chalk, briefly paused before climbing into the ambulance. Someone shouted a question, and although he wasn't supposed to answer, the horror in his eyes said more than words ever could. The doors slammed shut, the ambulance sped away, and suddenly, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Everyone knew Zak Bagans chased the darkest corners of the paranormal, but no one ever imagined the darkness might finally catch him. Yet whispers ran through the crowd, whispers about a new artifact, something recently brought in, something so disturbing that even Zak, a man unshaken by the most malevolent curses, refused to display it publicly. Those whispers weren't just rumors, they were the truth. Just over a week earlier, the museum's security footage captured Zak entering the building with a sealed wooden crate that looked older than any piece he'd brought in before. Its sides were scratched with strange symbols, burned deep into the grain as though carved by someone with desperate, shaking hands. Only a few staff members knew where it had come from, an abandoned mining town in Nevada that had been left off most maps for decades. Local legends claimed the town was cursed, buried under years of disappearances, violent outbursts, and a final event so strange the remaining residents fled without gathering any of their belongings. The artifact found there had been locked away under 5 layers of chain and a rusted industrial lock, as if the person who sealed it wasn't trying to protect the object, but trying to protect the world from what was inside. Zak, always drawn to the forbidden, believed he could handle it. He had been wrong. On the first night the crate arrived, alarms blared through the museum at 2:14 a.m. Motion sensors detected movement in a sealed wing where no one was allowed at that hour. Security thought it was a glitch, until they saw the feed. A tall shadow stood in the corner of the hallway, bending unnaturally at the shoulders, its head tilted toward the camera. Then it vanished. Staff tried to laugh it off, but the laughter died quickly when the power flickered. Every light in the museum dimmed, then flared to life so brightly that bulbs shattered in their sockets. Doors slammed one by one down the hallway like something was walking slowly, methodically, toward the crate. When Zak arrived the next morning, he inspected the security files himself. He spent nearly an hour in silence, watching every second of the footage, his face hardening more with each replay. He didn't share what he saw, but he did something rare. He ordered the crate placed inside one of the museum's most secure rooms, the chamber of containment, and no one was to enter without him. For 2 days, nothing happened. Staff went about their routines, though tensions simmered under every conversation. People spoke in hushed tones, glancing toward the restricted wing every chance they got. Something felt wrong in the building, a pressure that no one could name, as though the entire museum were holding its breath. On the third night, everything changed. A piercing alarm shattered the quiet. Not a security alarm this time, something deeper, metallic, almost painful. Employees ran toward the restricted wing, but the moment they approached the containment room, the temperature dropped so sharply that their breath fogged the air. The heavy steel door trembled as if something inside was pounding from the other side. Zak arrived within minutes, breathless, eyes wide but determined. He ordered everyone back, insisting he would handle it alone. Reluctantly, the staff complied, watching as he unlocked the door and slipped inside. The door slammed behind him. For almost 5 full minutes, nothing happened. No sound, no movement, no sign of what was happening inside. Then the screaming started. It wasn't Zak's voice. They knew that immediately. This scream was layered, distorted, as though several voices were crying out at once. The lights in the hallway flickered so violently the bulbs buzzed with electricity. Something banged against the walls from inside the room. Then something else, something heavier. When silence finally fell again, no one dared approach. It took 10 more minutes before the door slowly clicked open. Zak stumbled into the hallway, collapsing to his knees. His eyes were unfocused, his breathing ragged, and when 2 paramedics attempted to lift him, he whispered something no one could understand, just a low, broken sentence that made one of the EMTs recoil. He was rushed out of the building, barely conscious. Inside the room, investigators would later report that the crate, once sealed, was now wide open. What was inside it, no one has yet claimed publicly. The object, whatever it was, had been removed before the police even stepped foot inside. Only 2 people know where it is now, and both refused to speak to the press. But what the investigators did find inside the room sent shivers through the entire team. Scratched into the steel floor were long, jagged marks, too deep to be made by human hands. The walls, once reinforced, were dented from the inside outward, and every single camera in the room had been disabled simultaneously at the exact moment Zak walked in. Authorities issued a quarantine around the museum shortly after, though they refused to use the word quarantine publicly. They called it a temporary safety perimeter, but drones hovering above captured hazmat units entering the building hours later. Those images only intensified the chaos online. Meanwhile, the hospital remained on lockdown, with only senior medical staff permitted near Zak's room. They reported that he drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes waking with a jolt, gasping as though something unseen were inches from his face. Other times, he spoke in a whisper, repeating the same phrase he muttered when he first collapsed. Every doctor who heard it left his bedside with a shaken expression. Back at the museum, detectives and paranormal experts gathered to review the single piece of evidence Zak left behind. A voice recording captured on his handheld device moments before the incident. The recording was found lying on the floor beside the open crate, still running when investigators entered. The audio begins with Zak's voice, steady but cautious. He speaks about sensing pressure in the room, a heaviness that made it difficult to breathe. He describes feeling watched. Then he pauses, muttering that something is moving inside the crate even though it hasn't been opened. A scraping sound follows, then a loud thud. Zak whispers, "I didn't touch it." His voice trembles. Another thud. A sharper scrape. Something metallic hits the floor. Then, suddenly, a voice, deep, layered, echoing, speaks a single word that no one has been able to conclusively translate. Linguists claim it resembles a phrase from a lost Mesopotamian dialect. Occult experts say it's closer to something found in a forbidden 15th century grimoire. All anyone agrees on is this: the word wasn't human. After that word is spoken, Zak screams. It's short, cut off abruptly, as though someone, or something, had placed a hand over his mouth. The recording ends with a violent static burst, followed by a long, low exhale that none of the experts have been able to attribute to any known person or device. When authorities attempted to play the audio a second time, the file corrupted, dissolving into unreadable data. By sunrise, the haunted museum had become the most heavily guarded building in Las Vegas. News outlets looped the same short clip of the ambulance driving away, emphasizing the ominous phrase, "It's not good." Rumors spread like wildfire. Possession, curse, supernatural attack. Some spectators clung to the idea that it was all a stunt, but the fear in the voices of those who had been inside said otherwise. Even skeptics felt uneasy. Inside the hospital, one last event occurred before sunrise. A nurse on duty reported hearing knocking from inside Zak's room. Soft at first, then louder, insistent. When she opened the door, Zak was still unconscious, heart monitor steady. But the knocking continued. 3 slow taps, from inside the wall behind his bed. Maintenance crews later opened the wall. They found nothing. Experts are still analyzing the strange symbols found burned into the crate's interior. Some match patterns known from ancient protective rituals, suggesting the object inside was meant to be trapped, not released. But the final symbol, the one carved into the center, doesn't match any catalog on record. One investigator described it as a warning, not a seal. The world continues to wait for updates on Zak's condition. Doctors say physically he's stable, but mentally they're unsure. Every few hours he stirs and whispers the same phrase again and again, the sentence he muttered when he first staggered out of the containment room. And now that phrase has leaked. The words are simple, but terrifying. It woke up. What exactly it is remains the biggest question of all. Authorities refuse to comment. Museum staff have gone silent. And the artifact, the object that started all of this, has vanished into the hands of individuals who are not part of any official organization. What remains inside the museum, however, is chilling enough. A room torn apart by something invisible, claw marks etched into steel, and a recording so disturbing that every expert who heard it refused to listen a second time. Some claim the incident is far from over, that this is merely the beginning, that Zak, perhaps unknowingly, unleashed something ancient and restless, something that had been locked away for generations. What the headlines captured today may only be the first chapter of a far darker story. But one thing is certain, whatever happened inside that containment room, whatever opened that crate, whatever whispered that impossible word, it left its mark on Zak Bagans. And now, as he lies in his hospital bed repeating the same haunting message, the world waits in fear of what may come next, because if it truly woke up, it may not be going back to sleep. And that is why the headlines say what they say. 3 minutes ago, something changed, and it's not good. A low growl of thunderless vibration rolled through the haunted museum just after dawn, a deep, trembling hum that rattled window panes and sent police officers scrambling back several steps. No storm was anywhere near Las Vegas. The sky was clear, yet the building itself seemed to pulse, as if something inside exhaled with a force that the walls could barely contain. The officers guarding the perimeter exchanged wary glances, hands instinctively tightening around flashlights and batons. None of them wanted to admit it aloud, but they all felt it. The way the air seemed to thicken, the faint static crackling across their skin. Something inside that museum was still moving, still alive, still aware. Inside the hospital, Zak's condition had shifted. He no longer murmured the sentence in a soft, fading whisper. Now he spoke it with intention. Same words, same rhythm, but different energy. Almost as if he wasn't repeating something he had heard, but responding to something speaking to him. "It woke up," he muttered again, more firmly this time. The nurse monitoring his vitals swallowed hard. These weren't the words of someone delirious. These were the words of someone communicating. Outside his door, 2 doctors whispered urgently, their faces drawn with fear. They compared scans showing erratic electromagnetic spikes around Zak's body every time he spoke the phrase. Machines flickered, lights dimmed. Even the heart monitor occasionally displayed symbols instead of numbers, as though the electricity itself was glitching into patterns. Then something unprecedented happened. Every light on the entire floor went out at the exact same second. Not a flicker, just sudden, perfect darkness. Emergency backup kicked in, but only dim red safety lights illuminated the hallways. They cast everything in a crimson haze, turning doctors into silhouettes and shadows into moving shapes. The hospital PA system crackled to life, but instead of instructions, it emitted the same static, heavy exhale that ended Zak's recording. Down the hall, Zak gasped and sat upright in bed for the first time since the incident. His eyes were open, wide open, but unfocused, staring straight ahead as if looking through the walls. His mouth moved slowly, forming silent words. The nurse stepped backward in terror as the red emergency light flickered above him, casting his face in a pulsing glow that made every twitch of muscle more unsettling. Suddenly, the hospital windows vibrated violently. Not from wind, not from an earthquake, nothing external. The tremor coincided perfectly with something happening inside Zak's room. He wasn't touching anything, wasn't moving his hands or feet, yet the objects around him began to tremble. Instruments rattled against the countertop. A cup fell to the floor. The bed's wheels creaked as if someone unseen pressed down on the mattress beside him. And then Zak spoke again. "It's watching us." The nurse bolted from the room. Back at the museum, investigators inside the sealed wing finally gathered enough courage to re-enter the containment chamber. They wore protective suits and moved cautiously, stepping around overturned tables and torn metal as though walking through the aftermath of an explosion. The room still felt electrified, humming with a cold energy that made their teeth ache. One investigator lifted the lid of the empty crate, scanning the inside with a UV light. The burned symbols glowed faintly, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic shimmer, almost like a heartbeat trapped beneath the grain of the wood. Another team member called them over. He knelt beside a dark smear on the steel floor, pointing at the center of the jagged claw marks. Something new had appeared. Fresh lines, fresh symbols. The marks were carved into the metal, not scratched, not scraped, engraved cleanly, as though melted into the steel by an impossibly thin blade. But the pattern was unmistakable, a spiral intersected by a vertical line that curved at the top like a hook. No one recognized it, but one expert on the team had seen something like it before. He pulled out his phone, scrolling until he found the image he needed. A photograph taken from a remote cave in northern Iraq, etched on a stone wall the same age as the oldest Sumerian myths. A symbol nearly identical to the one now carved into the floor. That ancient carving had a translation beneath it. It meant released. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. Everyone froze. A cold breath of air drifted through the sealed chamber, extinguishing the UV lamp in the investigator's hand. But it wasn't just cold. It smelled like wet soil and rusted iron, as though something ancient had clawed its way up from beneath the earth and shaken the dust from its skin. A low clicking sound echoed from the far corner. Not mechanical, not human. The team backed out quickly, slamming the door shut and locking it with trembling fingers. But even through the thick steel, they heard one last sound. 3 slow taps, identical to the knocking heard in Zak's hospital room hours earlier. Tap, tap, tap. By now the media frenzy had reached fever pitch. Helicopters hovered over the museum. Reporters clustered outside the hospital, broadcasting theories and speculation that ranged from elaborate hoaxes to government cover-ups. But the truth, buried behind sealed doors and trembling staff, was far stranger than any headline dared to imply. Inside the hospital, a specialist in ancient linguistics arrived to examine the words Zak had been whispering. She sat beside his bed, speaking softly, introducing herself, hoping to establish some connection. Zak turned his head toward her slowly, movement stiff as though his muscles resisted him. He blinked once, twice, then, for the first time since the incident, he spoke something other than the phrase. "It's not just awake," he whispered. "It remembers me." The specialist's blood ran cold. Before she could ask anything else, the monitor beside Zak's bed let out a long, sharp beep. Not a flat line, but a distortion, a bending of sound. The numbers on the screen scrambled, forming symbols again. The lights in the room dimmed, then surged so brightly that the bulb burst above them. Zak clutched the sides of the bed, his body arching upward as though pulled by invisible wires. His voice deepened, not like possession, but like something was speaking through him, aligning its tone with his vocal cords. He uttered the same untranslatable word from the recording. The walls shook. Every electronic device on the floor shut down. Doctors sprinted in, shouting orders, pulling Zak back down, stabilizing his body. But even once the episode stopped, Zak didn't collapse back into unconsciousness. He stared ahead with an expression not of fear, but recognition, like he knew exactly what had awakened, and exactly why it had chosen this moment. Meanwhile, at the museum, the investigators reviewed new footage from cameras outside the containment room. Though the room's internal cameras had all been disabled, those watching the hallway had captured something astonishing. Just seconds before Zak stumbled into the corridor and collapsed, the lights overhead flickered. A shadow, tall, distorted, bending at the shoulders just like the hallway figure from earlier in the week, slipped through the closed steel door. Not through the frame, through the metal itself. As though the barrier held no meaning, as though nothing in that room could hold it back. The shadow drifted down the hallway, its form flickering as though made of thick smoke or shifting tar. One officer watching the footage paused the video, zoomed in, enhanced the contrast. What he saw nearly made him drop the tablet. Inside the shadow, within its shape, something faint glowed. A symbol carved into its center, the same spiral intersected by a hooked vertical line, the ancient symbol meaning released. But beneath it, in the grainy darkness, a second symbol pulsed faintly, one no one had yet seen in the crate, one that hadn't been carved into the steel floor, one that Zak, just seconds later, would whisper in the hospital while convulsing. It meant claim. The connection snapped into place like a trap closing. The object in the crate hadn't just awakened, it had chosen someone. And the moment it opened its eyes no human had ever seen, Zak Bagans became marked. Claimed? By what? No one could yet say. Some ancient entity from the Nevada mining town? Something unearthed from a forgotten chamber? Something carried across centuries in silence, waiting for the moment someone curious enough and brave enough would break its chains? One thing was now clear, it wasn't done. Not with Zak, not with the museum, not with anyone. And as the second morning sun rose over Las Vegas, streaking gold across the city, every person involved felt the same cold realization settle into their bones. Whatever this thing was, it was only the beginning.